Hello, everybody. Welcome to this week's episode of the Psych Crusader. So this is going to be a part two, and forgive me, I have a little bit of a sore throat, but this is going to be a second part of our first series talking about the Dark Triad. So I know we had a really good discussion in the chats about this last week, and hopefully everybody jumps in and we can continue this discussion. It was pretty productive. So I'm going to go back and we're going to recap a little bit so that way we know kind of where we're at and where we're going to go from here. So as we talked last week, so the Dark Triad has basically three main components that make up the triad, three different psychiatric conditions. One is Machiavellianism. For those of you who do not know what that is, it's the tendency to extremely manipulate people, where you're basically taking someone who lives in this box, right? This box of thoughts, and they have their minimum standard for what they'll accept in their moral compass, and then the maximum. What these people with the Machiavellianism try to do is they try to slide that over so you'll accept more irrational behavior from where your main root is at, to get you to see what else can they get out of you. Generally, it's a self-interest thing. They like to play the mind games with people. So that's basically what you're looking at when we're talking about Machiavellianism. So you also have the narcissistic personality disorder, which we've covered that in pretty great detail in my show. I think we did 3 segments on that. But narcissistic personality disorders, where you put yourself on this high pedestal, you have a lot of self-value. However, when we dug into the narcissistic personality disorder, we know that it's a false sense of enhancement, self-enhancement. You're generally raising yourself up to hide all your insecurities underneath. So without getting into too much of that again, that's the basic gist of the narcissistic personality disorder. I want everybody to be very careful when using that, because it's, in my opinion, it's one of the most overused disorders in the world. Every time you turn the TV on, somebody's calling somebody a narcissist. And that's a serious allegation. That's a serious condition. And some people just do not fit all of that criteria, but yet you're going to cause someone to start to slip their mind into a narcissistic personality disorder, just by categorizing them that over and over and over again. So it's one of those situations where you have to be careful and to not, really put someone into that narcissistic headspace when they were never there in the beginning. The third one is psychopathy. And that's where you're just impulsive. Like you get backed into a corner and you just lash out. And it's generally, you're very antisocial, but yet you can be violent. It's way more complicated than just saying, oh man, so-and-so's the psycho. It's way more complicated than that. So I don't want you to think that it's just like somebody that's completely unhinged, because there's a series of events that have to take place in order for the psychopathy to really kick in and be damaging to yourself and to others. You generally don't have any remorse for your actions. That's a big red flag for psychopathy. So those are the main components of the Dark Triad. It's relatively a new kind of situation that they've been talking about. I don't even think it's barely 20 years old, I think. So it may not even be that old. But as we know, like some of the behavioral actions that people go through with that they exert in today's society, a lot of internet trolls tend to have this Dark Triad situation. Not all of them. This is a generalized example. However, you're basically you're getting a euphoric response. You're getting a chemical reaction from your mind through sadism, and it's something that you don't really think is something, but once you really put it into perspective, when you're online, like a lot of people on like X, for instance, they get on there and they just troll people over and over and over again. Why do they do that? What do they get out of it? Well, they get this euphoric release of endorphins from the anger that they exert to people. So it's a form of sadism. Generally, the trolls are, they're antisocial. Their only voice is through a keyboard. A lot of people call them, keyboard warriors or whatnot. And they generally are on there just trying to bully people. Generally, people will have a criminal history or an escalating criminal history, and that's where you really need to pay attention. When you start off with like petty crimes and you're moving up to more escalating crimes, that's something you need to pay attention to, or pay attention to the people around you, because crime will escalate, and then your behavior and your disorders will get a little bit darker, a little bit darker, a little bit darker. Then pretty soon you're losing your remorse and your empathy towards people. So crime is a big factor in this. They talk about cyber crime where you do cyber attacks. It's another form of sadism. So the dark triad characteristics are generally viewed as extreme, and they are. I'm not going to downplay that. So when you start developing these symptoms, you're going to start off with something that isn't quite extreme, and it's going to build over time into an extremist idea. And in studies, they've broke this down into alt-right and alt-left. I'm not going to go back through that. We went through that last week, but it is a situation where these things can happen in the political forum as well. Right-wing people tend to be a little more radical. Super left-wing people, they tend to be a little more radical. It can happen. And then we also know about relationships where people in the dark triad can't sustain long-term relationships, because they just continually use people until they're either done with them, or the partner has figured out that this person has no empathy towards them, or no real genuine understanding for how they feel. It's usually one of those red flag guy types of people. Like, I knew he was off from the beginning, but he was nice and sweet, and then gradually, he started manipulating and maneuvering. And women are generally pretty hip to when they're being manipulated. So you really want to don't I don't want to say don't get into relationships with people in the dark triad, because there's people out there that are really trying to make it through this, and it's hard. But if you're not ready for that type of battle, you want to avoid people who exert some of these symptoms, because it's not only will they take themselves down, they'll take you down with them. And that's something that we don't need to have happen, because what we're going to do is you're going to generate your own mental disorder through that trauma or that relationship issue. So we're going to talk about the evolution of it. And like I said, I've got a lot of information on this. There's so much information, but there's not a whole lot of accessible case study on it, because it's not something that's commonly labeled on people. Generally, either you have one of the other more common psychiatric disorders, or you'll have a multiple diagnosis, like where you're antidepressant and a narcissist, or antidepressant, or you're depressed and you'll be clinically depressed, and one of the others, which I don't know why I'm drawing a blank, probably because my sinuses are all clogged up and I can't think clearly. But so the evolution of this, and we're gonna go into that. Let's hope that we can kind of explain some of how this moves through your mind. So despite the relationship of these traits with clinical disorders, some argue that adaptive qualities may accompany the maladaptive ones. Their frequency in the gene pool requires at least some local adaptation. The everyday versions of these traits appear in student and community samples, where even high levels can be observed among individuals who manage to get along in daily life. Even these samples, research indicates, correlates with aggression, racism, bullying, among other forms of social aversiveness. Um, so what that's saying is they're basically giving you an example of when can things escalate, when can they start to evolve. They gave a good example of in educational settings or colleges where you go through different you're going through your own development as a person in these like younger years, and there's you have this transitional period between some of your junior high school years and into college. So there's a lot of transitioning that happens right there in your own life cycle. So you're going to go through a lot of different things, and so you're going to either absorb a lot of behavior or you're going to reflect a lot of behavior. So when you're absorbing a lot of aggression and bullying and just a lot of negative behavior towards you, it's going to put you in your brain is going to go into a defense mode. And what happens a lot is it'll exert out whatever your brain chooses at that time to defend against these things that hurt you. Whether physically or emotionally, your body, your mind is going to react to that and is going to try to protect itself. So generally, the more harsh the abuse is, the more drastic your brain response is going to be. So that's how a lot of the people who have dark triad tendencies, they have gone through some very, very severe things in their life. Whether you have seen a gruesome murder or a really bad car accident, or your dad beating your mom, or whatever the case, whether you were abused as a child or sexually abused, there's all these different types of ways that are very easy for the mind to put up these defense mechanisms. So when we go back and we look at the three components of the dark triad, you look at Machiavellianism. So if you've gone through some very traumatic events, you're going to use this tool, Machiavellianism, to manipulate your way through danger. You're going to always keep yourself in a position to where you can't be hurt. And then you look into the psychopathy. Psychopathy is the same way. You're going to use that as a defense mechanism to keep people away from you. You're going to get ultra aggressive. You're going to get very belligerent just to keep people away from you. People are going to look at you and go, this person is not stable. I'm going to stay away. So it's a defense mechanism. And then we go down and we look at the narcissism. So you have to, in order to complete these other tasks, you're going to have to, hey, Rob, what's up, man? Glad us in Canada are on better terms again. For now. But the third one is the narcissism. So when you go through narcissistic personality disorder, that's also a defense mechanism that enhances the other two. So you have to kind of lift your own self-esteem up to hide, just like we just talked a little bit ago. You're going to be hiding these weaknesses that you have on the inside, which is going to, in turns, the narcissism is going to enhance the other two. So we have to understand that this isn't something that your brain concocted to be destructive. It was concocted to give yourself safeguards. The problem is the intensity of it is so great that a lot of people, they don't realize it's happening, and they don't realize what to do if they do notice it's happening. So we're going to go into the next segment, and then we'll discuss that. So it's been argued that evolutionary behavior predicts not only the development of dark triad personalities, but also flourishing of such personalities. Indeed, it has been found that individuals demonstrating dark triad personality can be highly successful in society. That's true. They can be. Is it hard for them to do? Yes, because because they go through so many of these different cycles of the triad. However, Machiavellianism does work very well in people trying to climb a corporate ladder, because you're going to manipulate your way through. So you can generate a certain sense of success in companies that you may or may not work for. May work for. I guess you can't may not work for it. However, the success is typically short-lived. The main evolutionary argument behind the Dark Triad emphasizes mating strategies. This argument is based on life history theory that proposes that individuals differ in reproductive strategies. An emphasis on mating is termed as fast life strategy, while an emphasis on parenting is termed a slow reproductive strategy. There's some evidence that the Dark Triad traits are related to fast life history strategies. However, there have been some mixed results, and not all 3 Dark Triad traits have been related to this strategy. A more detailed approach has attempted to account for some of these mixed results by analyzing the traits at a finer level of detail. So that's a lot of gobbledygook when you really look at it. But they're saying the success is short-lived, that you're going to get detracted by other things, and they talk about the mating cycle of a human, that they're always going to look for the fast track. So when their progress in their company slows down, they're going to look towards other avenues of fast tracking. So they get the job locked in, it gets boring, the challenge is over, they're going to move on to a relationship. Until that gets boring, the challenge is over, they're going to keep moving on. It's a cycle. Also, in the first paragraph that we talked about, it talks about adaptive qualities. So it's just like what we just talked about, where you have these traumatic events that happen to you. Those are not necessarily 100% genetic. They can be, but it's not always like that. So if you don't have, an active gene for any of the Dark Triad, that means that you got it from environmental factors. So whatever your traumas were that led up to you activating all 3 aspects of the triad. So that's just something that I wanted to add in there before we moved on. So we'll talk about the accelerated mating strategy here real quick, because they just brought it up and I made some notes on that. So I must have thought it was important enough to talk about. So what they're talking about with the accelerated mating strategy, so they've done studies that suggest that on average, those who exhibit the Dark Triad and personality traits have an accelerated mating strategy, reporting more sex partners, more favorable attitudes towards casual sex. So, I mean, you can look at this one of several different ways. It's either irresponsible sex patterns, that there, once again, we're looking at that. There's no remorse. There's no empathy. You're going to use these people for whatever you need to use them for, and then discard them generally. So you're going to have lower standards in short-term mates. Basically, it's like going to the bar and just grabbing the first thing that looks decent and taking it home. It's not. I mean, I know when you're under the influence, it's a whole other different ballgame, but that's kind of a comparable metaphor for how that works. You're going to take more risk-taking. Substance abuse can be a problem. A tendency to prefer immediate but smaller amounts of money over delayed but larger amounts of money. So you get a little bit more risky in your financial patterns. It's a quick hit, kind of like being a drug dealer. You go out there, you make that quick money, but do you still have it in 6 months? Probably not. So you could also have somewhat of an ADHD type of situation, like we're talking about these quick highs. And that's basically what ADHD is. You're constantly searching for that quick high. It's very opportunistic. So you're going to find these things. You're going to go, ooh, shiny. That's shiny over there. I'm going to do that. And then when it's not shiny anymore, you're going to move on to something else that's shiny. So you really want to, if you have people in your life that are like that, you're going to want to know how to, react to that and put them in a different path and say, hey, look, you're going to want a little bit more stability and not just jump from life high to life high to life high. But there's a lack of empirical evidence for reproductive success in the case of like psychopathy. Additionally, the traits are not universally short-term oriented, nor are they impulsive. Much of the research reported pertaining to the Dark Triad cited in the above paragraph is based on statistical procedures that assume the Dark Triad is a single construct in spite of genetic and meta-analytic evidence to the contrary. So like I said, more gobbledygook. Hey, James. Every time I do a podcast, my cats want to act up and get in trouble. Every time. Never fails. So the next one leading in is like the physical attractiveness, how they view physical attractiveness. So there's been a research on the potential attractiveness of the Dark Triad traits. Out of all the traits in the Dark Triad, Machiavellianism was the least attractive to the opposite sex. Women, Jenny Lynn says I'm international now. James, you didn't miss much. We were kind of reviewing what we talked about last week, what you were here for. But physical attractiveness, this is what they're talking about. Women are not going to like the Machiavellianism part of it because they've seen it all before. Men are always trying to manipulate women to get whatever they want. So generally, women have a radar for that. They know what's happening. They know when they're being manipulated. So it's an easy one for them to kind of sniff out. A lot of women will discard the manipulation a little bit because they've seen every man do it. So they just generally will assume that that's what we do until it gets to a certain point to where they have now moved their moral compass to accommodate for this manipulation. And that's where the line gets drawn. So women are not going to be attracted to this, but they'll be a little bit more patient with it just to see if the manipulation moves their moral compass. Generally it does. So that's when they want to cut that off. When we look at like the psychopathy part of it, so another study claimed that this was that their scoring was a lot higher in psychopathy in the mock system. So it's possible that individuals do not like cynical, manipulative, like aggressive, remorseless, and duplicitous people such as Machiavellians and psychopaths. So psychopaths is a tough one because you have a lot there's that's like a ball. This is how I'm going to describe it. So psychopathy is like a ball. Okay, so you have this ball, and instead of having like a straight path to where behavior goes this way and behavior goes this way, it's a ball. So when that behavior happens, it can go in any direction. And so it's hard when you deal with people that have like a psychopathy. It's hard to predict what their response is going to be. You can predict that they're going to have a behavioral issue, but a lot of times it's hard to predict where that response goes. It could go to just putting yourself into a hole and climbing back into your shell and just being antisocial for a while. Or it can go as extreme as to where now you're exerting aggressive behavior out in public, where you're getting very testy with people and you start to lose empathy towards people's feelings. So that's going to be something that generally women will cut that off right away. As soon as things start to get aggressive or something that they don't think that they can deal with their partner, like you just sit in your room all day. I can't live life like this. That's kind of one of those things that they'll go through as well. So they generally find that narcissistic people are generally judged to be better looking. So it's easier. That's why all women say that every man is a narcissist, because we're all so dashingly good looking. But generally, those that are true narcissists generally are good looking, and they use that to their advantage to enhance their narcissistic behaviors. It helps fuel them because people will say, wow, you're good looking. So now they've gone from this bar of narcissism, now they're here. So there's going to be this rise in self-esteem that they usually don't have. And so they use their narcissism to kind of mask their insecurities about their self-esteem. Well, now they're being fed that because of their attractiveness, but maybe they're not very smart, or maybe they've got some other flaw that they're hiding, and they're using their attractiveness to hide their insecurities. Now, for women, a lot of women will fall for that physical attractiveness. They'll say, wow, this person is gorgeous. And so they'll deal with a lot of their other issues that people on the Dark Triad will bring to the table. So as you can see, like I said at the beginning, and at the beginning of the first episode that we did, this is a very confusing condition for people. And it's not easy to navigate through life when you're the person that has Dark Triad tendencies. And it's not easy if you're the person who is around someone with the Dark Triad tendencies. It's a constant maneuvering around. Are they playing the chess game with me? Are they doing this? Are they doing that? And you have to adjust. And if you're not intellectually prepared for that, these people are going to eat you alive. I'm going to tell you that right now. And James will agree with me on that. You become a danger to people. Whether it's psychiatrically, physically, emotionally, they will destroy you eventually. And I don't want to sit here and say that every single person is going to be like that, because they're not. However, it's more likely than not that you're going to cause some damage to someone in some type of way. Okay, so I'm going to go back up and cover. So now treatment wise, treatment's difficult. I'm not going to lie. It's difficult. They're going to want to medicate you heavily. So there's no specific treatment for the Dark Triad in its definition in itself. So what they have to do is they have to treat the three parts of it. And each one has a different treatment plan. So it's going to make it very difficult to really get a full-fledged treatment. Narcissism is, as we know, is treated different from psychopathy. Psychopathy is going to be treated way different than Machiavellianism. Actually, you're probably not going to treat Machiavellianism. You're probably going to focus more on the narcissism and the psychopathy, more importantly. So the treatment plans are going to be different. Like I say in all of them, every episode, self-identification is extremely important. I believe that the sooner you identify, right, so, James, that's a good point. Okay, that's why I wanted you to come on this one, because I knew you've got a lot of experience in this, so I wanted you to talk about it. So it's just like with all of these, James, that there's no cure for them. There's no cure. Once you have it, it's there. Yes, narcissism, you can give, depending upon how your narcissism is affected, you're generally going to be put on some kind of a downer a little bit. Hey, there's Shauna. Shauna's in the house. So with psychopathy is going to be very similar. It depends on how bad it is. I've seen extreme cases where people were put on like high doses of lithium, and sometimes that wasn't even working. So it just depends on the type and the severity of things, obviously, and you'll know that, James. It's hard that you have to give the doctors time to really dial in the treatment plan to see if I got to give you 10 more milligrams of this, or dial back a few milligrams of that. So it's just a playing around of your meds until they can get all of them functioning at one time. It's going to be a real science experiment. Um, and you know what? You're right with the CBT and the DBT. Um, and that's going to show my age, because we did not focus on those things when I was in college, because they weren't it wasn't a wide range option. But it's something that I am paying more close attention to. Okay, so with treatment wise, it's going to be complicated, and you're going to spend a lot of time in therapy with your psychiatrist for them to really start to dial that in. That's the moral of the story. Without getting too technical, I mean, I could probably get on here and find a sample treatment plan, but it's going to be different with everybody, because everybody's going to have different levels of this and different levels of that. So psychotherapy is going to be one of your top options. You're going to want to talk these ideas out and talk these things in your head. Um, you're going to want to paint this picture to your psychiatrist so they can understand where your thought process is at, and where was it, and where can it go. They're going to be able to kind of get ahead of your behavior a little bit that way. That's the whole point of psychiatry, is to see where your behavior was, where it's at now, and where's it going to go. And generally people are predictable in that manner. However, with the Dark Triad, it's a lot different, because you could have an emphasis on Machiavellianism one week, and then next month you're on your narcissism, and then you could be in psychopathy. So it just depends, and you're gonna have all of them at the same time. However, you're gonna highlight some here and there. I don't know why I did that. I don't know why. Everything you do has intention, so it just depends on what I was trying to do. So I'm going to give you guys a couple examples of some cases, without naming names, that I have personally dealt with, that of two young kids that I worked with that were definite Dark Triad candidates. So I had one kid, when he got brought in, he was a young runt in this treatment facility that I worked at, for the baddest of the bad. And this kid came in, and they handed us his profile, and we had a big discussion about it. And he had the same psychiatric profile as Jeffrey Dahmer, except this kid was exerting the behaviors 30 years before Jeffrey Dahmer did. This kid was already there. He's Jeffrey Dahmer right now. And so, for those of you who don't know, Jeffrey Dahmer was in the Dark Triad. He was a narcissist. He was manipulative. He would go to the bars and manipulate these men to come back. And then he experienced psychosis. So he fit all of the criteria. So did this kid. So I remember when they brought him in, one of his treatment goals. So Dahmer had a lot of stuff going on, James. I'm glad you brought that up, because Jeffrey Dahmer was schizophrenic. He was like hearing things, and like, so he had that schizophrenia. I see bipolar. I'm not sure. I think he probably had that as well. Let's just say it's probably well to assume that he was bipolar as well. Just for the sake of argument. He probably most likely did. Jeffrey Dahmer had a lot of stuff going on. For you to do the things that he did, you've got a lot going on. But anyway, this kid, he came in, and he was already at that point where he wanted to murder animals all day. That's all he cared about. So the number one goal in his treatment plan was he was not allowed to assault any animals. And so the facility that I was at was in a woods. So naturally, there's animals everywhere. So it was he lived at this treatment facility. And I remember several times where he would just dart out the door and, he would be yelling at a raccoon or a squirrel or whatever was outside. He wanted to kill it. Like his first instinct was to kill an animal. Um, okay. Yeah. I'm gonna have to go back and reread his profile, but he, I think it's safe to say that Jeffrey Dahmer fit the dark triad. He was all the above. However, back then there was no dark triad, so he would not have been put on that in that category. To further go with this case, we even had to pull we had an aquarium, like a fish tank in this cottage. We had to take the fish tank out because this kid wanted to kill all the fish. It was insane. And there were times where he would manipulate us. He would go 2 weeks and be like the most perfect angel and do all the right things, say all the right things. He would participate in group therapy. He would participate in his own psychotherapy. He was doing everything right, and it was just so we would put our guard down just enough to where he could get the things that he was trying to get to, and he was very, very patient and persistent. And so once we figured out his behavior and his patterns, we were able to get ahead of him, and eventually, we were able to make a little bit of progress with him. I don't know what happened to him. We worked with him for several years, and he's well into his adulthood right now. I don't know what happened to him. I would be willing to say that with his family dynamic that he had, along with his kind of rebellious behavior, that it probably did not turn out well for him. So we had another one too, and this kid, he was quiet, very antisocial, didn't want to talk to anybody, didn't want to associate with nothing. So at first, when I first met this kid, I'm like, why is this kid here? He seems so isolated into himself, and this was without me reading his case file. And so I started thinking, well, there's something to this kid then. What is it? If he's here with the worst of the worst, I've got some of the worst gangbangers in Ohio. They've shot people, murdered everything that moves, stabbed people. Somebody killed somebody with a golf club. There was the worst of the worst here. And so this kid came and I started to notice he was weaving a web. And he would only associate very quietly with other people, where he was a seed planter. He would just plant the seed, plant the seed, plant the seed. And then pretty soon a chain of events would happen. And while the chain of events is happening, it took all the attention away from him to where he would get lost in translation. So what happened was it gave us a sense, and this is where we got tricked by this kid. It gave us a sense of hey, you're not in on this, giant ordeal that's going on. You must be one of the better kids. So we entrusted more with him, and it ended up burning us really bad, to the point where we were in some legal situations. But we took these kids on a camping trip, and we kept very tight leash on everyone except for him. In the middle of the night, he left the campsite, walked about 2 miles through a field, and went into a house and raped a woman and her kid. And he ended up murdering somebody later, but that was on us, and that became a big giant ordeal. Luckily for me, it's not lucky for anybody because of the trauma that got caused. But we were a government funded research facility, so they couldn't really do anything to us. But I actually got to know that the family that was victimized by him over the years, and at first they were not very happy that I was, there, knowing that my neglect had caused that to happen. However, I became friends with them over the years, and they're good people, and they have forgiven me, and I'm glad, because I'm glad they're all successful now, especially the daughter, that she's successful in what she does. But that's how good, and our staff was good. Like, we were good at what we do. That's how good this kid was. I don't want to say good. That's how skilled he was at manipulating. He had weaved this giant web and tricked everybody there. And you wouldn't look at him to be a threat. When you walked into a room, you'd be like, oh, who's this kind of doofy kid that never talks to anybody? But he had masterfully played every piece on the board. And so that is definitely something that opened my eyes. And I saw a different type of strategy that way. And like I said, eventually he went on, once he left our program, he ended up faking his way through another program, and got out and killed somebody. So this is a serious situation. When you are on that dark triad kind of spectrum there, you're at risk. And James was starting to touch on that last week. You are a threat to people. You are a threat to anything that you can come into contact with. You're going to try to manipulate your way through things. You're going to try to charm your way through things, and you're going to try to kind of scare people away from you. And it's a very tough situation. You don't want to go through these things. If there was I wish I could take all that away from people, because it's a struggle when you look at some of these cases, the cases of people that I've had to personally deal with, and I've dealt with more than just those two. These are just the two that stuck out to me that I wanted to talk about today. And it just shows you how dangerous it can get. And things can escalate. And if you don't have some kind of control over your thought process and know what stages of this you're in, you're going to be in some big trouble. And so I highly recommend, if you start to feel like, I'm just manipulating my way through people, or I'm exerting narcissistic personality disorder, or if I'm going through these psychosis periods where I'm having a lot of ups and downs and all arounds, then you need to start to really take this seriously and go talk to a psychiatrist. Start to sort this out and make it make sense to you, because you have to be able to look at yourself in the mirror every day. And you know what, James? Unfortunately, I hate to say this. I don't like saying this, but you're probably right. So James is saying, like, basically, you just don't get into contact with people. You just avoid everybody because you're a threat to them. And I feel bad. I feel really, really, really bad, because there's no quick fix to this. There's no magical pills that you can take that's going to solve all these problems. That's going to make you think like a neurotypical. You're never going to think like a neurotypical, ever. But what you have to do is understand the reality of yourself, and moving forward, be around, you at least need a couple support people, even if it's, somebody that you just talk to online, somebody that you can just throw, sometimes a perfect stranger, you can throw all your feelings out to them, then you can walk away from them. And you're right. I will give that advice out to people. If there's people out there and they're on the dark triad, just don't interact with them. That's how serious this is. And I generally like to like give people hope and send people off into this bright direction, like, oh, tomorrow will be a better day. But that's not the reality with this. It's not the reality with this. You're going to be mentally tortured every day. Your partner is going to be mentally tortured every day. This is not a good situation. And like James is dealing with this. This is what he deals with. Um, and you're right. Cold therapy is very effective. Um, I do like that method. I think that you facing your trauma is and we've talked about this in some of my other episodes, where when you face that trauma and you deal with it and you start to defeat that trauma, it does help. Um, and it's a good thing. It's a good thing to try. In this situation, anything that you do psychiatrically to kind of close a door on a past trauma or a past event or whatever it is, anytime you have the ability to do that, it's a good thing. You're going to make, even if it's the tiny step forward, you whatever traumatized you to this point is probably not, you're not going to be able to just walk away from it unscathed. It's going to be there with you, but it's how you heal past it. It's you're going to see it every day. Every time you wake up, you're going to see it. Every time you go to bed, you're going to see it. However, the more at peace you get with it, that you can look back and say, I'm dealing with this. I'm defeating it. It's never going to leave me, but I'm in control of it. And that's kind of where you want to get to with these types of things. I'm gonna leave it at that. I think next week I'm going to jump on. You know what? I'm not real sure. I'm not sure. I was gonna do something, but I think I might change my mind. So I'm not gonna announce it. I'll do it. I'll do it. Eventually. But I'll be back here on the Psych Crusader next week. I got a sore throat, so I need to rest my voice. But James, 100%. Thank you for coming on the show. I do hope that you continue to watch and we go through some of these, some other different conditions, and that you can help kind of chime in. But just take it easy, buddy. And, take it a day at a time. And thanks everybody else for tuning in and jumping in the comments. It was a lot of fun. G-Bro was in here. Rob's from Canada, so I'm gonna be nice today. Let's get Trudeau out of there. Get him out. All right, I'm out. Peace.